The mail arrived in industrial-sized sacks. Every Monday morning, 6 canvas bags would be delivered to Brigitte Bardot's Paris apartment, each one stuffed with letters, thousands of them, from every corner of the world. Marriage proposals from men she'd never met, love confessions from teenagers who'd seen her films, poetry written in languages she didn't speak, photographs of strangers who wanted her to remember them. 10,000 letters every single week. Her secretary would sort through them, categorizing them by urgency and insanity. Fan mail, business inquiries, threats. There were always threats, and love letters, hundreds upon hundreds of declarations from people who believed they loved her. Brigitte would sit in her bedroom, door locked, and stare at the bags piled in her hallway. All that paper, all those words, all that supposed love, and she felt absolutely nothing except a crushing, suffocating loneliness. Because not one of those letters, not a single one, was written to her. They were written to Brigitte Bardot. The image, the fantasy, the two-dimensional projection on a movie screen. But the actual woman, the one crying alone in her bedroom, she was invisible to all of them. The letters started arriving in late 1956, shortly after, and God Created Woman premiered. At first, Brigitte read them, every single one. She'd sit for hours, carefully opening envelopes, reading strangers' confessions, trying to understand what they saw when they looked at her. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I dream about you every night. I'm in love with you even though we've never met. You're perfect. You're everything I've ever wanted. The words should have felt good. They felt like horror, because these people didn't know her. They didn't know she hated mornings. They didn't know she cried herself to sleep most nights. They didn't know she loved animals more than people. They didn't know she was terrified of thunderstorms. They didn't know she laughed at stupid jokes. They didn't know anything real about her. They loved a character, a performance, a carefully constructed fantasy that bore no resemblance to the actual woman. One letter in particular stayed with her for years. It arrived in March 1957, written in careful English by a young man in Nebraska who'd seen her film 3 times. Dear Brigitte, I love you more than anything in the world. I know we're meant to be together. You're exactly what I've always imagined a perfect woman would be. Beautiful, confident, sensual, free. I dream of the day we meet, and you realize we belong together. I'm saving money to come to Paris. Wait for me. Your future husband, Robert. Brigitte read it twice, then set it down with trembling hands. This stranger loved her. He was saving money to travel across an ocean to meet her. He believed they were destined to be together. And he knew absolutely nothing about who she actually was. He loved a ghost, a projection, a fantasy that would shatter the moment he met the real her. That's when she stopped reading the letters, because each one was a reminder that she was the most famous woman in the world and simultaneously the most unknown. Her secretary Marie tried to make her understand that the letters were a gift. Do you know how many people wish they had this? Marie would say, gesturing at the overflowing bags. People loving you, wanting you, thinking about you. They don't love me. Brigitte would respond quietly. They don't even know me, but they want to. Isn't that enough? It wasn't. It was the opposite of enough. It was the problem. Being wanted isn't the same as being loved. Being desired isn't the same as being known. And being famous isn't the same as being seen. 10,000 letters a week proved that millions of people were looking at her, but not one of them was actually seeing her. The cruelest irony was that the more famous Brigitte became, the more isolated she felt. In 1958, a survey conducted by a French magazine revealed that Brigitte Bardot was the most recognized woman in the world, more recognizable than political leaders, royalty, or other celebrities. Everyone knew her face, her name, her body, but nobody knew her favorite color. blue, like the ocean. Nobody knew she was afraid of the dark. She slept with lights on until she was 35. Nobody knew she volunteered at an animal shelter on Sundays, the only place she felt useful. Nobody knew she wrote poetry that she never showed anyone, because vulnerability was too dangerous. 10,000 letters a week, and not one person asking the questions that would have revealed the actual human being. The letters themselves followed predictable patterns. Category 1. Physical obsession. Your body is perfect. I can't stop thinking about your lips. You're the sexiest woman alive. These made Brigitte feel like an object, a thing to be consumed, not a person to be known. Category 2. Projection. You're exactly like me, free-spirited and unconventional. I can tell from your films that you understand me. We're soulmates. I just know it. These made her feel like a mirror, reflecting back whatever the writer needed to see. No actual identity of her own. Category 3. Savior complex. I want to rescue you from the industry. You deserve better than Hollywood. Let me protect you and show you real love. These were the worst, because they pretended to see her suffering, but they still didn't see her. They saw a damsel to rescue, not a person to know. The impact on Brigitte's psychology was devastating. She developed what psychologists would later call recognition without connection, being globally famous while feeling completely invisible as a human being. In her private journal from 1959, she wrote, "Today I received 847 love letters, counted by Marie, 847 people who claimed to love me. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them wanted to know my thoughts on anything real. Not one of them saw past the image to the person underneath. I am the most loved woman in the world, and I've never felt more unlovable." The paradox was destroying her. To be adored by millions, yet convinced she was fundamentally unworthy of genuine love. Her relationships suffered catastrophically because of this dynamic. Every man who approached her was already in love with Brigitte Bardot, the fantasy, not Brigitte the person. They'd pursue her aggressively, convinced they'd won some cosmic lottery by getting her attention. Then, when they got close enough to see the real woman, complicated, damaged human, they'd lose interest. Because the real Brigitte was disappointing compared to the fantasy. She wasn't endlessly confident. She was insecure. She wasn't always sexual. She was often afraid of intimacy. She wasn't perfect. She was broken. And men who'd fallen in love with perfection couldn't accept humanity. Her second husband, Jacques Charrier, admitted years after their divorce, "I married Brigitte Bardot. I wanted the glamorous actress. When I discovered the real woman, the one who cried and needed reassurance and wasn't always performing, I didn't know what to do with her. I'd fallen in love with an image. I wasn't prepared for a person." The worst part was that Brigitte internalized this rejection. If men fell in love with the image and left when they met the real her, their logical conclusion was obvious. The real her was unlovable. The image was worthy of love letters. The person was worthy of abandonment. So she stopped letting people see the real her. She became the image full-time and felt even more alone. A makeup artist who worked with her throughout the early 1960s recalled, "She had this way of becoming Brigitte Bardot the moment anyone was around, like putting on armor, seductive, confident, untouchable. But one day I arrived early and caught her before she'd transformed. She was in her robe, no makeup, crying over something. When she saw me, she wiped her face and became the goddess within seconds. I said, 'You don't have to do that with me.' She looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. 'Yes, I do. The real me isn't what people want. They want her,' pointing at her reflection. That's when I understood. She'd learned that being real meant being abandoned, so she stopped being real. The mail kept coming, week after week. By 1962, Brigitte had received an estimated 2 million letters, 2 million declarations of love, desire, obsession. Her apartment had an entire room dedicated to storing them. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with unopened envelopes. A museum of one-sided love. Evidence that she was the most desired woman on earth. And she'd sit on the floor of that room sometimes, surrounded by all those words, and feel the crushing weight of being loved by people who would hate her if they actually knew her. One evening in 1963, Brigitte did something she'd never done before. She grabbed a random bag of mail, carried it to her bedroom, and started reading, really reading, trying to find just one letter that saw her as a person rather than a fantasy. She read for 4 hours. Hundreds of letters, marriage proposals from men, describing the perfect life they'd build together. A life based entirely on assumptions about who she was. Love confessions from teenagers who'd built entire relationships in their heads with someone they'd never met. Sexual fantasies from strangers who felt entitled to share their desires because she'd been naked on screen. Not one person asked, "What do you think about? What makes you laugh? What are you afraid of? Who are you when nobody's watching?" Not one person wanted to know the actual human being behind the image. Brigitte ended that night, sitting on her bathroom floor, crying so hard she vomited. 2 million love letters. And she'd never felt more unlovable in her life. The turning point came not through a letter, but through silence. In 1965, Brigitte received a simple postcard. No photograph, no declaration, just a handwritten note. "I saw you at the market yesterday. You looked sad. I hope you're okay. A neighbor." That was it. 12 words. No request for a photo. No marriage proposal. No projection. Just human concern. Brigitte cried when she read it, because for the first time in nearly a decade, someone had seen her. Not Brigitte Bardot, her. She kept that postcard in her wallet for the rest of her life. 12 words of genuine human concern meant more than 2 million love letters, because they acknowledged her humanity. After retiring from film in 1973, the letters slowed but never stopped. By then, Brigitte had learned to see them for what they were, evidence of her success as a performer, not evidence of her worthiness of love. People loved Brigitte Bardot the character. Good for them. But that character had nothing to do with her actual worth as a human being. Real love, the kind she'd been desperately seeking, couldn't come from strangers who'd never met her. It could only come from people who knew her and chose her anyway. And that kind of love was rare. Hard-won. Nothing like the easy adoration of fans. In a 1989 interview, Brigitte was asked about the letters. "You received millions of love letters. Did that make you feel loved?" Her response was immediate. "No, it made me feel invisible." People think being famous means being loved. It doesn't. It means being projected onto, being used as a mirror for other people's fantasies. Love requires knowing someone, really knowing them, their flaws, their fears, their contradictions, choosing them, despite or because of all of it. Those letters weren't love. They were wishful thinking. "Do you think anyone truly loved you?" She paused. "Eventually, yes, but only after I stopped being famous. Only after the people in my life had no reason to be there, except that they wanted to know me, not the image. The animals love me. They don't care what I look like or who I used to be. They just know I feed them and keep them safe." That's more real than 2 million love letters ever were. In her later years, Brigitte would sometimes reflect on the paradox of her fame. She'd been the most photographed, most desired, most written to woman in the world, proof of love everywhere she looked. Yet she'd spent decades convinced she was fundamentally unlovable, because all that adoration was directed at someone who wasn't her. The real her, the one who needed love most, had been invisible the entire time. A psychologist who studied celebrity culture later analyzed Brigitte's experience. She suffered from what we call spotlight isolation, being hyper-visible in one dimension as an image while being completely invisible in the dimension that actually matters as a human being. The tragedy is that all that attention made genuine connection nearly impossible, because anyone approaching her was already in love with a fantasy. They couldn't see the real person because the image was too bright, too overwhelming. She was drowning in love that wasn't meant for her and starving for love that was. The last love letter Brigitte Bardot received was in 2008, more than 3 decades after she'd retired. It came from a man in Japan who'd been writing to her for 40 years. He'd never received a response, never expected one. He just wanted her to know she was loved. Brigitte read it with the same hollowness she'd felt reading the first one in 1956. This stranger loved her, had loved her for 4 decades, had dedicated significant portions of his life to expressing that love, and he knew nothing about her, except what he'd projected onto a screen. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say, because you can't explain to someone that their love is meaningless when they've built their life around it. You can't tell someone that being adored by millions while feeling completely unloved is a special kind of hell. You can't make people understand that recognition isn't connection. Fame isn't intimacy. Desire isn't love. Brigitte Bardot received 10,000 love letters every week for over a decade and felt completely unloved. Not because the letters weren't genuine, they were to the writers, but because every single one was written to someone who didn't exist. They loved Brigitte Bardot. Confident, sexual, free, perfect. She was none of those things. She was scared, damaged, controlled, human. And humans can't survive on love meant for someone else. The paradox of fame, being seen by millions while remaining invisible to everyone. Being desired universally while feeling fundamentally undesirable. Receiving endless declarations of love while believing you're unworthy of being known. Brigitte spent decades swimming in letters that proved she was loved, and drowning in loneliness that proved she wasn't. Because love without knowing isn't love. It's projection, fantasy, consumption. And you can't build a life on 2 million beautiful lies. Eventually Brigitte stopped reading the letters, stopped hoping one would be different. She learned to find worth in being known by a few rather than desired by millions. In the quiet love of animals who didn't care about her face. In the simple concern of neighbors who saw her as human. In the hard-won acceptance that fame's love is fool's gold, glittering and worthless. The bags of letters still came for years, declarations from strangers who loved someone who'd never existed, and Brigitte finally stopped letting that destroy her. She learned the hardest lesson, that being unloved by millions who think they love you is better than spending your life trying to become the person they want. Better to be truly yourself and unknown than famous and invisible. Better to be loved by one person who sees you than adored by millions who don't. 10,000 love letters a week, and not one of them knew her name wasn't really Brigitte.